My name is Gerald Harmon. I was clinically dead for 11 minutes. The pen was still in my hand when they found me. I want you to hold that for a second before I say anything else. Not the dying part, the pen. I had been reviewing a loan file. Tab 7. The covenant review section of a commercial real estate package I had seen 100 times before. It was a Tuesday afternoon in September of 2023. It was 2:47. I know the exact time because it was in the incident report, which I read 3 weeks later sitting in my kitchen in Columbus with a cup of coffee going cold beside me, reading about my own death the way you read about a stranger. If what I am carrying back from that experience reaches you, if something in what I describe lands the way it landed in me, I would ask you to subscribe to this channel, because there are more accounts like mine, and I believe you are someone who needs to hear them. And before we go any further, I want to ask you something in the comments. How long have you felt that something was wrong with the financial system? Not wrong in a general way, wrong in a way that has made you quietly hesitant to trust it the way you used to. Write that down, because what I was shown is going to confirm something you may have already been sensing. I had been at that bank for 31 years. Not 31 years in banking generally, 31 years in that building, at that desk, in that particular chair that had a slow leak in the left armrest that facilities had been promising to fix since roughly 2014. I was Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending. I reviewed loan portfolios. I assessed risk for a living. I sat across from business owners and retirees and farmers and contractors, and I told them what was safe and what wasn't. I had been doing that since I was 27 years old. I was good at it. The morning of that Tuesday had been ordinary in every way I know how to measure ordinary. I had a 7 o'clock coffee. I drove in on Route 40 with the radio on, a discussion about interest rate projections that I half listened to and mostly agreed with. I reviewed my calendar. I had 3 meetings, 2 calls, a lunch I was going to cancel because the covenant review package was running long. My assistant Linda had left a yellow sticky note on my monitor that said the regional director had moved Thursday's call to Friday. I remember peeling it off and dropping it in the recycling bin under my desk. I remember thinking that was a small relief. That is the last thought I remember having in my previous life. I do not remember anything between that moment and finding myself approximately 8 feet above the room looking down. There was no warning. There was no chest pain that I was aware of. There was no tunnel, no building light. No sense of sliding towards something. The cardiac event happened and then I was above the room. That was the transition. Fast and total, the way a light goes out. What I saw first was Linda in the doorway. I saw the exact posture a person takes when they have found something they cannot process yet. One hand on the door frame, both feet still in the hall, head tilted forward. She covered her mouth. I recognized that gesture. I had seen it at the bank when we had to inform clients that their accounts had been compromised. The gesture of someone who knows something bad is true and is not yet ready for it to be true. I watched her cross the room toward my desk. I watched her pick up the receiver of my desk phone. I heard her voice from above, calm in the way that people are calm when they are holding everything together by the thinnest possible thread. And she gave the address of the building and the floor number, and she said the words, "Cardiac arrest." I want to be precise here because precision is what I know, and it is what this experience requires of me. I was not confused. I was not afraid. I was not experiencing what I can only call the normal register of a man who is watching paramedics work on his own body. I was observing. I was watching the way I watch a loan file, with a kind of professional clarity that had not yet been interrupted by the awareness of what was actually happening. The paramedics arrived. I counted 3 of them. I watched them move with the economy of people who have done this many times. I watched the defibrillator come out. I watched the first shock. I watched the lead paramedic look at his partner and say something I could not hear, and I watched his partner nod. I watched them try again. I was 11 minutes dead, according to the record. From where I was in that room, those 11 minutes did not feel like 11 minutes. They felt like the amount of time it takes to understand something that you have been not understanding for a very long time. And then the room became less relevant. That is the only way I know how to say it. Not that it disappeared, not that I was pulled away from it. It became less relevant the way a problem stops mattering once you have understood that it was never the real problem. The room was still there. Linda was still there. My body was still on the floor beside the overturned chair. but the room was receding in importance, the way the shore recedes when a boat moves out to sea. Not gone, just no longer the main thing. What replaced it is the reason I am telling you this. And I need you to understand something before I describe it. I am a person who does not have a framework for what happened next. I grew up Lutheran in a general cultural way. I believed in God in the way that most people who do not think about it very often believe in God, as a background assumption like believing in gravity. I had never had a spiritual experience. I had never had a vision. I had never spoken to a presence or received an instruction from outside my own head. I was the person in every conversation who provided the rational explanation. I was the person who, when a colleague mentioned an NDE account they had heard, nodded politely and said something reasonable about oxygen deprivation and the brain under stress. I am telling you all of this so you understand what it means that I am saying what I am about to say. What I was shown was a river, not metaphorically, not as a symbol I am retrospectively interpreting, an actual river, wide, slow-moving, with an opaque surface the color of old pewter. The sky above it was a color I do not have a name for, somewhere between the gray of early morning before the light fully arrives and the quality of light in a room where something serious is being discussed. The banks of that river, both sides as far as I could see in either direction, were lined with safe deposit boxes, thousands of them. Floor to ceiling, if floor and ceiling are words that apply, stacked in rows with the same institutional regularity you would see in the vault room of any bank branch in America. The kind of boxes I had been walking past my entire professional life. The kind of boxes that hold wills and deeds and coin collections and the documents people decide are too important to keep at home. The kind of boxes that represent the decision a person has made to trust a system with the things they cannot afford to lose. And the river was rising. I stood at the edge of that bank, and again, stood as an approximation, but it is the closest word I have for the experience of being present and upright and observing without a physical body. And I understood several things at once, not sequentially, all at once, the way you understand a room when you walk into it, not processed, received. The first thing I understood was that this image was not symbolic. It was not a parable my sleeping brain had assembled from professional anxieties. It was specific. It had the quality of an event rather than the quality of a dream. I have had dreams about work. Every banker has. This was not that. The difference is the difference between a photograph of a fire and an actual fire. One is information. The other is heat. The second thing I understood was that the river rising was not a punishment. There was no anger in this image, no divine judgment, no moral verdict being handed down. It was a consequence. It had the character of a law of physics being demonstrated, inevitable, impersonal, and entirely preventable if you are standing far enough back to see what is happening and choose to move. The third thing I understood, and this is the part I want you to hear very carefully, was that the water did not care what was in the boxes. Decades of accumulated savings, life insurance payouts, deeds to properties that represented every year of someone's working life, municipal bond certificates, the paperwork of retirements carefully planned and dutifully funded over 30 and 40 years. The river was rising against all of it with the same indifference. It had no mechanism for distinguishing between the careful and the careless. It had no provision for the fact that the people whose boxes were fullest were the people who had the least time and the least capacity to rebuild what they would lose. I want you to sit with that, because I recognize those boxes. Not individually, not by name, but by type. I had opened accounts like the ones in those boxes for 31 years. I had told the people who owned accounts like those that they were safe. I had said the words, "Your deposits are federally insured," more times than I can count, with the confidence of a man who understood the regulatory architecture and believed in its sufficiency. I had built my professional life on the premise that the container holds. What I was being shown, what I could not look away from, was that the container was not going to hold. Not because it was poorly constructed, because the weight pressing against it was not the weight it was designed to carry. And the weight had been accumulating for longer than most people realized, and the timeline for when it would become critical was not theoretical. It was specific. The proximity I was given, and I use the word proximity deliberately because it was not a calendar date, it was a felt certainty, the way you know a storm is close because the pressure in the air has changed, was before December of 2026. That is less than a year from the day you are watching this. I need to tell you about the moment the presence arrived. I had been standing at the bank of that river, observing the image, taking it in with the same instinct I bring to a stress test report, when I became aware that I was not alone. Not in a frightening way, the opposite of frightening. It was more like the awareness you have when someone you trust completely enters a room and has not yet spoken. The quality of the space changes before the words arrive. I have called this presence God because it is the most honest word I have, and I want to be clear that I am using it with full awareness of how inadequate it is. It was not a figure in the way I would draw a figure. It was not a voice in the way I would describe a voice. It was more like being in a room where the intelligence of the room was directed entirely at you. Not examining you, not evaluating you, but attending to you the way a person attends to someone they have known for a very long time and are concerned about. Complete attention, without division, without the portion of it held back for something else. The presence did not speak in sentences. What I received came as understanding, not language. But understanding has content. Understanding is not vague. What arrived in me, fully formed, the way a sentence arrives when you have been thinking about something for a long time and it finally crystallizes, was this. The account is not the money. The account is the trust. And the trust is already gone. I want you to hear that the way I heard it. Not as a slogan, as a diagnosis. I have spent 31 years in commercial banking. I know what a trust structure is. I know what it means when the foundation of a financial instrument is the belief of the party holding assets that the party holding the assets is capable of and committed to their safekeeping. I know what happens to that structure when the belief fails. Not when the assets fail, when the belief fails. The assets can be technically present and the structure can still be collapsing because the confidence that gives the assets their function has already left the building. What the presence was communicating was that this process, the erosion of the foundational confidence in the system, was not coming. It had already happened. The visible collapse that people would point to later and call the event would not be the beginning of the failure. It would be the public acknowledgement of a failure that was already complete. The river was not going to rise. The river had already risen. What I was seeing in the image was not a forecast. It was a delayed, visible consequence of something invisible that had already occurred. That distinction matters. It matters because of what it means for the timeline. When a building is on fire, there is a window during which leaving the building is possible. That window closes. The presence was not communicating urgency about a distant future event. It was communicating urgency about a present tense window that was in the process of closing. The action that would protect the people standing on that bank was action that had to be taken before the river reached the boxes. Not after, before. The phrase that came with this understanding, the phrase I have been carrying since I came back, was simple. Move what you can move while you can still move it. I'm going to say that again because it is the most important sentence in everything I have told you. Move what you can move while you can still move it. That is not a metaphor. That is a banker's instruction from the other side of the only experience I have ever had that I know with complete certainty was real. I need to tell you about the boxes that were open. As I stood at the bank of that river, my attention moved, in the way attention moves in that state, not gradually, but with the immediacy of focus, to the boxes that were already open. Not breached, open. The lids were raised and what was inside was visible. What I saw inside was not money. I want to be very precise here because I know how strange this sounds, and I am not in the business of sounding strange. I am in the business of being accurate. What was in those boxes was time. Not abstractly, not as a concept, but as something that had the appearance and the weight of compressed light. Decades of it. The accumulated years of a working life stored in the way that people store the things they have decided are too important to keep at home. I understood what I was looking at. I had spent my career watching people make the decision to defer, to work another year, to not touch the principal, to leave the account alone because the account was the retirement, and the retirement was the plan, and the plan was the thing that made all the years of working make sense. I understood the human investment those boxes represented, not financially but humanly. The specific gravity of a life built on the assumption that what you put in you would eventually be able to take out. The river was rising against all of it. And I want to tell you something about that moment that I have never been able to fully explain. Not to Diane, not to anyone. Standing at the bank of that river, watching the water rise toward the open boxes, I felt something that I can only call grief. Not for myself, not abstract philosophical grief, specific grief, the kind that has a face on it. I was grieving for people I had known professionally for decades, people I had looked in the eye across a desk and said, "Your deposits are federally insured and the system is sound," and I believed it when I said it. I was grieving for people who had trusted me and trusted the system I represented, and who were going to open a statement one morning and discover that the container had not, in fact, held. That grief is still in me. It has been in me every day since September of 2023. It is part of why I am here. I want you to stop for a moment. I need you to actually hear what I am about to say. Not the dramatic version of it, not the YouTube video version of it. The actual version, the way it came to me, with the flatness of a fact rather than the electricity of a revelation. There are people watching this right now who have spent their entire adult lives building something that exists inside the financial system. Retirement accounts, savings accumulated over 30, 40, 50 years of working, money that was deferred and compounded and left alone because leaving it alone was the responsible thing to do. People for whom losing this is not a setback. People for whom losing this is the end of the plan they built their whole life on. I am one of those people. I had the spreadsheets. I had the retirement projections. I had 2026 circled in my mind as the year I was going to step back and begin drawing on what I had put in. I came back from 11 minutes of clinical death, and the first thing I did, not after I thought about it, not after I talked to a financial planner, not after I processed the experience through the lens of my professional background and arrived at a considered position. The first thing I did was start moving things, quietly, before I told anyone, before I had words for what I had seen, because the instruction was not complex and the window was not infinite, and I had spent 31 years understanding what it means to act before the margin disappears. Move what you can move while you can still move it. That is the phrase I carry. I am giving it to you now. I am not here to tell you where to put it. I am not a financial advisor in this context, and I would not be serving you honestly if I pretended to be. What I am is a banker who was dead for 11 minutes and was shown a specific image with a specific timeline and returned with a specific instruction. What you do with your specific circumstances is yours to navigate. But the principle I was sent back carrying, is that the window is open right now and windows close. What I am asking you to do this week is one thing, just one. Look at what you have inside the system. Look at your accounts, your retirement accounts, your savings, the instruments that are held for you by institutions you have trusted to hold them, not to move them, not yet, just to look, to actually see what you have, what percentage of your net worth exists inside the container, and what your options would be if that container became compromised. That is not paranoia. That is the same risk assessment I did for 31 years for other people. The only difference is that this time I am asking you to do it for yourself. And then ask yourself how long you have been postponing that question. Ask yourself whether you have been waiting for the evidence to be undeniable, because the presence communicated something very specific about the evidence. By the time it is undeniable, the action you could have taken will no longer be available. That was the urgency, not fear, not disaster prepper energy. The calm, clinical urgency of someone who can see the margin closing and knows you cannot see it from where you are standing. You are watching this for a reason. I do not say that as a platform convention. I do not say it as a way of making you feel seen. I say it because it is what the presence communicated, that this information was not for me alone, that the image I was shown required a person who would understand it precisely and carry it accurately, and that the carrying was not the end of the assignment. The end of the assignment was the reaching. Someone watching this video is the person this was meant for. I do not know who you are. I do not know your situation. I know that you found this, and I know what I was told. If something in what I shared today landed, if something in the image of that river and those boxes and the water rising reached you in a way that you recognize, I would ask you to subscribe to this channel. There are more accounts like mine, people who came back carrying specific things, people who saw specific windows and specific timelines and were told to speak. This channel is where those accounts live. You being here matters, not for the algorithm, but because these testimonies are meant to reach the people who are prepared to receive them. And you being here suggests you might be one of those people. In the comments, I want to ask you something. What is the one thing you have been putting off that you know you should do? Not in general. Specifically, the thing you wake up at 2 in the morning knowing you should have done already. Write it. Put it on record somewhere outside your own head. Sometimes the act of saying it is the beginning of the act of doing it. I spent 2 years not saying this. I watched the months pass. I watched what I had been shown begin to align with what I was reading in the financial news, in the bank earnings reports, in the language regulators use when they are trying to say something serious without saying it directly. I set a private deadline. I told myself that if I had not spoken by the end of 2025, I never would. January of 2026 came and I told Diane I was done waiting. She already knew. She had known since the night I came home from the hospital and told her everything in the kitchen at midnight, still wearing a hospital bracelet, before I had the language for any of it. I came back for a reason. I believe this is part of it. Whatever is coming, and something is coming, and the timeline is not distant, I hope this reaches you while the window is still open. That is all I was sent back to say.